Deep in the Amazon rainforest, something strange is happening. An ant starts to twitch, just a little at first, barely noticeable. But then he stumbles out of formation, climbs a nearby branch and locks his jaw down tight. Not because he wants to, but because something inside his brain is pulling the strings. A fungus, Cordyceps. And what it does is horrifying. It doesn't just kill, it takes control. This isn't a sci-fi nightmare. It's real. For years, scientists said it was limited to insects, that we were safe. But lately, that belief has started to crack, because the fungus is changing, evolving, and by the end of this video, you'll see how close we really are to losing control of our own minds. Cordyceps is a real-life fungus. You'll find it deep in the jungle, growing silently but with purpose. It isn't just a parasite, it's a puppeteer. When it infects an ant, it doesn't kill it right away. No, first it's pressed through the body, like a parasite on autopilot. Then it starts to release chemicals that hijack the ant's nervous system, that override instinct, that rewrite behavior. The ant is still alive, still moving, but it's no longer in control. Instead, he climbs up a branch, locks his jaw into a leaf, and waits. That's when the horror begins. The fungus grows, it breaks through the ant's exoskeleton, and eventually it erupts right out of the head. Spores are released into the air. The next victim is already out there. And this isn't rare. Cordyceps has evolved to do this with terrifying precision. Each strain targets a specific species: ants, spiders, wasps, beetles. And here's the part that should really scare us. Some strains are already mutating. They're adapting to new environments and to new hosts. Fungi once limited to the tropics are now showing up in places they should never survive. Why? Because the climate is changing. And with it, so is the fungus. In 2019, scientists warned that as global temperatures rise, fungi might evolve to survive higher heat. That's bad news for us, because one of the only things protecting humans from this kind of infections is our body heat. But what happens when the fungus adapts? What happens when that defense fails? Could Cordyceps, or something like it, make the jump to humans? And if it did, would we even notice until it was too late? Cordyceps isn't the only parasite that rewires its host. There are worms that make crickets drown themselves. Toxoplasma, a common parasite in cats, has been shown to alter the behavior of mice, removing their fear of predators. And in humans, some researchers believe it might be linked to risk-taking, even mental illness. So the idea that a tiny organism could change behavior is not science fiction. It's already happening, just on a smaller scale. But what about fungi? What about Cordyceps? For a long time, scientists believed that Cordyceps couldn't infect humans because of temperature. Most fungi can survive in warm environments like the human body. But that's changing. As global temperatures rise, some fungal species have started to adapt, surviving in hotter and more humid environments. And that's raising red flags. For example, in 2023, the World Health Organization named fungal pathogens as a top emerging global threat, right alongside viruses and antibiotic-resistant bacteria. One of the most concerning, Candida auris, a fungus that's already infecting humans and killing them. Unlike Cordyceps, it doesn't control the mind, but it does spread quickly, resists treatment, and survives on surfaces for weeks. It's the kind of pathogen that feels almost engineered.
Fungal infection of this kind is real, but not in humans.
True, fungi cannot survive if its host's internal temperature is over 94 degrees. And currently there are no reasons for fungi to evolve to be able to withstand higher temperatures. But what if that were to change? What if, for instance, the world were to get slightly warmer, well, now there is reason to evolve. One gene mutates, and an Ascomycetia, Candida, ergot, Cordyceps, Aspergillus, any one of them could become capable of burrowing into our brains and taking control not of millions of us, but billions of us. Billions of puppets with poisoned minds, permanently fixed on one unifying goal: to spread the infection to every last human alive by any means necessary. And there are no treatments for this, no preventatives, no cures. They don't exist. It's not even possible to make them.
So if that happens,
we lose.
And that's what inspired the creators of The Last of Us. They didn't invent the idea of a zombie fungus. They took Cordyceps and simply asked, what if it jumped to humans? In the show and the game, climate change becomes the trigger. Temperature rise, the fungus evolves, and suddenly we're not immune anymore. It's terrifying because it's not that far-fetched. It's not about if it could happen exactly like the game. It's about how nature already has the blueprint. So let's say just for a moment that it did evolve, that it found a way to survive inside us. What would that look like? Let's imagine it begins with something small. A patient in Jakarta reports flu-like symptoms: fever, confusion, muscle spasm. Doctors think it's viral. They treat it, but it doesn't work. 2 days later, he vanishes, walks out of the hospital without his shoes. Security footage shows him wandering into the jungle. The next week, a researcher in Brazil collapses in a remote lab. His lungs are filled with spores, but not from any known species. By the time they trace the connection, it's too late. The fungus doesn't spread through bites like in the movies. It's airborne. It lingers in old buildings, in damp ventilation systems, in food storage units. All it takes is a single breath. And the symptoms, they're not what you expect. First comes the fatigue, then confusion, but then comes obedience. Victims stop resisting. They follow unseen patterns. They walk to isolated areas. They gather. And then, when the fungus is ready, it blooms. Not with violence, but with silence. Stalks push through the skin, spores rise into the air, and the cycle begins again. Governments scramble to respond. They lock down cities. But Cordyceps doesn't respect borders. It doesn't need a passport. It travels by air, by food, by freight. At first, the media calls it a fungal outbreak. Then they stop calling it anything at all, because those infected, they're not dead. They're somewhere else, somewhere deep beneath the surface, while something else walks around in their place. And what terrifies me the most is that they don't scream, they don't fight, they just obey. Okay, coming back now, let's see what we know. Cordyceps exists. It already controlled the minds in ants, spiders, wasps. It's precise, efficient, and terrifyingly patient. We know that fungi are adapting faster than we expected. The WHO has already raised the alarm, and doctors are now facing fungal infections that were once considered impossible. But here's what we don't know. What's next? Can a fungus really evolve to control the human brain? Can it override our nervous system, our decision-making, our instincts? Most scientists say, not yet. But even they admit we don't fully understand how fungal intelligence works. Some fungi exhibit emergent behavior. They coordinate, they grow in patterns, they respond to their environment. They even solve mazes, and they communicate through chemical signals like the neurons in our brains do. In 2022, a team of researchers recorded a fungi emitting electrical impulses, tiny spikes of voltage that resemble neural activity. Now listen to this. Some of these impulses mirror the structure of human language. Let that sink in. A fungus that speaks in signals. A mind made of mycelium. Now imagine what happens when that mind begins to evolve, to adapt to heat, to resist medicine, to reach out, not just into the soil, but into us. Some researchers have begun asking questions they would never dare 10 years ago. What if the brain isn't the only place consciousness can live? What if intelligence doesn't need a skull? And what if we are not the ones in control anymore? Because here's the unsettling truth. Nature doesn't care what we believe. It just keeps evolving. And sometimes, what it evolves isn't just strange. It's something we were never meant to understand in the first place. Maybe this fungus never makes the leap. Maybe it stays buried in the jungle, content to puppeteer ants for the rest of time. But then again, maybe it's waiting. Because the scariest thing about Cordyceps isn't what it's doing now. It's what it's already proven it can do. Hijack instinct, rewrite behavior, control something from the inside out without ever being seen. And if that's possible in ants, what's stopping it from happening to us? Because what if the real threat isn't something out there? What if it's already inside, learning, adapting, and preparing to wake up? Not to destroy us, but to replace us. We like to believe that we are in control, that our thoughts, our choices, our minds are our own. But the truth is, we don't even fully understand how our brains work, let alone what happens when something else decides to move in. So if you start to feel different, if the world begins to feel off, ask yourself, is it stress? Or is it something deeper? Something ancient? Something fungal? Truth? Fiction? You decide.